Welcome, everybody, to Motherhood, raw, full but true, with me, your host, Rainbow Goddess. This podcast offers candid portrayals of the reality of mothering in a Western, individualistic, patriarchal culture. Before we begin this episode, I wanted to take some time at the end of 2024 to thank all of you listeners for your support for the podcast and all of your comments on how this podcast is helping you, how it's become a medicine in your life. The first year of this podcast has been such an incredible gift. As I reflect on 2024, I've learned so much from the guests and had truly life-changing conversations that have inspired me to adapt, that's then brought more benefits to my life. So I'm so grateful. I've got big plans for 2025, just giving thanks for the mothers who come on here and share the truth so bravely so that we can debunk the myths of motherhood and relate to each other, making the challenges of matrescence more normal and then easier for us all to navigate, because we're not all pretending everything is fine. So in 2025, I'm going to focus on growing the brand, and I've got some really exciting ideas. So stay with us, subscribe to this channel and stay up to date for all the new releases. And you can also go and join the Facebook page, Motherhood Raw Full but True, where I post links to events and where we can communicate beyond the boundaries of this podcast. So on that note, I'm really excited because in January, I'm hosting some really special events for mothers. The first is a free 90-minute restorative yoga session on the 4th of Jan. And then that same evening, the 4th of Jan, I'm doing a talk, Motherhood, Myths and Mycelium, which is a revelation on matrescence, where we look at the cultural milieu, we explore some of the myths, and then we're going to look at female spirituality fundamentals and frame motherhood within this mycelium metaphor. And then on the January the 6th, we've got a free discovery circle, which is to learn all about empowering motherhood, which is a new online wellness hub and community just for mothers, designed by mothers and facilitated by myself and Alexi on the universalmovement.com platform. So all the links to these incredible things are in the description, and it'd be incredible to see you there. Now, thanks for that brief interlude. Let's dive into this episode. So welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be interviewing Lorna. I met Lorna in the schoolyard, Midgley School. She's a fellow mum. Her child is the year above mine. So she's really getting into the swing of this, having your child in the school, in this institution, in this like conditioned paradigm of Western schooling, which is quite academic. And yeah, so we connected around the compromises almost that we have to make. And one day in the schoolyard, you said to me something, Lorna, that was quite profound around it being like a piece of your heart goes, or I can't remember your exact words, but it was like that. And it really made me think, oh, I've got to get good with this, letting go, this surrender to this system, because I'm not privileged enough, or our life isn't the right conditioning to homeschool, or it's not the right choice for us. So it's good to have you on, Lorna. Welcome. Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. So Lorna is 34, a veterinary nurse by profession, and her daughter is 5 years old, is in year 1. Tranquil, my son's in reception. And you've got a nuclear parent set up family. Yeah, living near the grandparents. I often speak to your mother-in-law at school, and she's doing the school run. And you've been in a relationship for 12 years.
Yeah. Yes.
So coming on, Lorna, it's a real privilege. And what we're going to do first, listeners, is Lorna's just going to contextualize her situation, her journey in becoming a mother. Then we're going to go deep with this episode into the personal subjective experience of these traditional schooling systems. So Lorna's going to speak a lot about her personal experience, how some of the challenging things have forced her to look inwards, as a result of not being with her daughter Fern all the time. So we're going to speak to some of the clunk that might come up and some of the compromises, some of the emotional stuff that might come up because of this situation that we're forced into. So do you think that sets the scene, Lorna? Anything else you want to add at the beginning before we go in?
No, I think that's fine. I guess it was a bit of a bumpy one, really. So I'll just dive in there. So I've always had issues with my cervix, which is fairly pivotal to having and keeping a baby in. So we knew that the carrying and birthing of a child could be quite difficult for us. I became pregnant as a surprise. It was very much wanted, but it happened a lot sooner than we expected it to, which I always think like the universe knows what it's doing and it always has a bit of a plan. And I felt that the timings of it couldn't have been better, really. It needed to happen then. I needed a lot of intervention with my pregnancy. It was high risk, either late miscarriage or early birth. So looking at premature potentially happening. I had a lot of intervention, like I said. Was off work on bed rest for quite a long time, needed some surgical intervention. And then I got to 34 weeks. So I had her at 34 weeks and 3 days. She had to go into special care. So she was in special care for a fortnight, which was a really difficult time for us both. I think in a lot of ways it was a really positive experience because you really had your hand held in those early days. But at the same time, it was really hard because obviously I was there from the time that you could get there to late at night. I was there the whole time. I was expressing like round the clock. I felt like a dairy cow. It was just like a very intense experience, but they were just incredible at the hospital. And it's really tough, but you just have to dig deep and just get on with it because those are the cards you've been dealt and that's where she needed to be. So yeah, it was a really tough one. She had jaundice, so we had her for 10 minutes and then she got wheeled off into the unit. And then overnight she was then put in an incubator because of a variety of different things. So it was probably about 24 hours until we could really hold her. And then I had to ask them, obviously, when I could hold her because she had to have light therapy fairly intensely. And obviously, when they're in the incubator, I can't remember what phrase they call it now, it's completely gone, but it's essentially where you can put your hand on their back whilst they're in the incubator because she needed like heat, she needed fluid, she needed oxygen, obviously. But I'd put my hand in and that would cover the vast majority of her body, really. So I couldn't even really do that in those really early days. Anyway, she came good. And then in the second week, she was out of the incubator and into a cot and we could put clothes on her, which felt very monumental, really. And then eventually got her home. And I do feel like I hear people talk about like the newborn bubble, like they come home and you're surrounded by balloons and flowers and all this sort of stuff, which is wonderful and lovely. And we never got that. Our bubble was in the hospital. And I guess I have to view it as, I think, like you said before, like having a baby isn't what it looks like on TV and in the films. I think like being able to conceive, carrying and having the baby, it's a miracle that human life still goes because it's just fraught with so many complications, isn't it? And I definitely experienced those. So I guess even from the get-go, it was a very bumpy start. I had to put my faith in science and hospitals. And like my mum said before, I, probably didn't feel like she was really mine. And I think there was an element of that because I guess there's so many different factors that are at play. And even the simple thing of I want to hold her was really difficult. She had an apnea monitor on and she had fluids in the first sort of 24, 40 hours. And you couldn't just be like, I'm going to get my baby out and give her a good old squeeze. There was none of that really. So yeah, but then when we got home, it just melts away. All of that stuff just melts away and you just get into your own little rhythm then, don't you? And I was just desperate to get out. Just wanted to just show off my baby and be like, look, it's just so wonderful. Really, just get out there and get some fresh air into us both, really. So yeah, and then bless her, she then got bronchiolitis in the November. So she had the lung development of a 1.5-month-old. So we had to go back into the hospital for a week. And then from that point, it was smooth sailing. She was doing fab. And then it was my turn then to have some issues. Going back to the cervix issues, I knew that a hysterectomy was always in my future. So it was our baby or nothing. So it was very much a one shot. And if that shot didn't work out, that was it. We weren't going to have our family. And I was due to have a checkup, but obviously COVID hit. So my checkup was delayed. So in the October, I ended up having my check. And they did a couple of biopsies. Then later that week, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. So obviously that was like the bottom of your world, just being rug completely taken out from under your feet, really. And it was obviously really difficult. Sorry. I think when you have that, even when you don't have a child, obviously it's horrendous, but when you've got something that you love so dearly and the potential for that to be taken away. Sorry, just have a minute. Just take your time. Sorry, I didn't think I was going to get upset. Oh, I thought it'd be fine. I've told this story so many times, but yeah. Yeah, so the idea of not being around is just horrendous. It's just really awful, and it obviously really makes everything come into very harsh perspective, really. What you value and everything else, it really gets a little microscope on all of that. So yeah, being diagnosed and all of the treatment, obviously it was a really difficult process. We were in lockdown, so it was just us in our bubble. My mum worked at the hospital at the time, so obviously she really couldn't mix with us, and so she could just only stand obviously at a distance, and she couldn't even give me a hug before I'd have my surgeries and that sort of thing. So it was really tough, but there was a lot of positives that came with it, even though it came with obviously some pretty tricky stuff to deal with. It has brought a lot of positives as well. One of them being is that it's shown me what my strength is. I had to be strong, and I had to really dig deep through the pregnancy, the Scaboo days, but I saw my strength as an individual, because my other half could come in when they diagnosed me, even though we knew really, because we'd been through that particular sort of, I'd had 3 lots of treatment to try and get rid of the precancerous cells before pregnancy. Myself and my partner knew what that sort of pattern looked like, and this 4th time the pattern looked different, and I knew, because they'd rung and they'd said, can you come in? That never happened. So I knew at that moment that it was going to be cancer. But yeah, so what it did do is it showed me my own strength and my own resilience, because it was during COVID, so my other half couldn't come with me to anything. He would drop me off and he would be as close as possible to where he could be, but he couldn't come in till the consults, the MRIs, the surgical, pre-surgical assessments and things. He couldn't do any of that with me, which was really tough, and really tough for him as well. But it showed me that I do have that resilience and that bravery in me, like staying in hospital after the surgeries, etc. I had to dig deep because I had no other option. And I know that even though now obviously there's the passing of time and it feels like I'm maybe not quite as resilient as I was, but I guess I've not been like challenged to that level where I have to dig that deep, really. But so yeah, so that was, so my little girl was just over 1 when I was diagnosed, and I always think she was like my saviour, really, because you have to keep going. You have to keep going, because they have no idea, and they shouldn't do, because they're just babies. You've got to keep going for them. And I think, and I can count on one hand, like the days where I just didn't want to have to deal with it. It wasn't that I didn't want to have to be okay with it, because no one was forcing me to be okay with it, because how can you be in those moments? But I just didn't want to have to deal with it. But yeah, she kept me going, because she's always been such a busy being. She really kept me going through those really dark days, really. But yeah, I think there was positives come out of it for sure. One of them,
I just want to say, Lorna, how inspired I am. Like, I have days where I feel really tired and I can't be arsed. But I have no idea what it's like to be carrying something like that, like facing your own mortality, feeling pretty racked inside with what that means. And then as a mother, thinking that you might not be there, like, after how hard you worked to have this child, after everything you went through, and then having to do the mother work, having to tend to the needs of your child, having to show up. I have no idea the strength that it must have taken. And then seeing you with what you said, the bravery, be like, this is happening, I've got to go in here on my own, I've got to do the MRI on my own. Like, how isolated you were because of the pandemic. And yet you carried on and you carried on because you had to. So this speaks to the endurance that you've got. I'm really inspired. Thank you so much for sharing that. And bless you. Wow, what a lot of stuff. What a lot of stuff to go through in such a short space of time. Wow. Yeah, premature baby, being in the hospital, having all of that first part. There's this talk of the golden hour, isn't there? Talk of the golden hour where once your baby's been born, you've got these pathways being established in your brain, deeply embedding, like bonding. And I think there's a lot of women who experience grief later on when they didn't get that. I didn't get that. I was so drugged up. I didn't have the golden hour. And I've, for the first couple of years of his life, on his birthday at 6:10 in the morning, re-embodied it and tried my best to just sit in it and remembering and reframe it. But yeah, I do feel like something was taken, something precious. And I've often thought, did it impact how much I loved him? If I had have had a golden hour, would I have had more patience certain times? Or would things have been a bit easier? Or would I have found co-sleeping a bit easier if I'd have had them neural networks laid down right at the beginning? Nobody knows because we haven't done any research on it. So yeah, it's just brought those things up in me and just celebrating you, really. Wow, what a woman, how much you've been through there and survived it. So we'll come back to that last point, what you were going to make, this positive thing, one of the examples of the positive thing. And then I'm dying to know, and I'm sure the listeners are dying to know as well, are you cancer-free now?
yeah, so touch wood. So I'm 3 years on now. So at 5 years, they can declare you as signed off. They're all clear. People refer to it as, don't they? So yeah, as a self-preservation, I don't like to think of it that way, because for me, I can't, because yeah, but I'm getting closer and closer, and I'm on yearly checks now. So I was on much more frequent checks, but I'm just gone to yearly now. Yes. Touch wood.
Fantastic. Good to know. Blessed be to the next 2 years and your body and the rest of your life, maybe in the all clear for the rest of your life. And yeah, just have health and longevity and yeah, just the space and abundance you need to really enjoy life, because you've been through so much, haven't you? So go on, hit us with the positive thing. What was the positive thing?
What to come out from everything? I think one of the things that sort of I took home from it as well as, and I remember it was a really clear moment, which just sounds really random, doesn't it? But I think when you're not directly thinking of it, stuff comes to you, doesn't it? And I remember, so my other half has a brother and I have a sister. And so I've always really wanted, in my head, I was like, I'll have 2 children. And then I remember I was sweeping and I said to my other half, I said, I think this is what needs to happen, because I think I would have really beaten myself up and torn myself apart really at the idea of not trying for a second. And I said to my other half, I think this needs to happen to get me closure on that, albeit in a quite extreme way. But I think the trauma that we both have experienced with having one, I think really whether we would have gone for a second, obviously we'll never know, but I know my other half didn't want to go through it again because he said to me before, if it hadn't have worked out, he stood to lose both his child and me. And he said before that he felt completely powerless standing by, and obviously all he could do was support, and he did that in abundance, and I'm so lucky to have him. But I think this had to happen for me to get closure on that. And I'm not sure that I ever will, if I'm truthfully honest. I don't think it's something that I'll ever really feel completely at peace with, because I think it's a choice. The choice gets taken away. I think it would be different if we'd have, as a partnership, come together and said, okay, are we going to do this or are we not? And if it came to that, we thrashed out over a million conversations and the outcome was no, we're not. We've been lucky enough to have what we have, and we are incredibly lucky to have her. We've not been able to do that. The choice was taken away, really. And I think that's the hardest thing. And I think for a long time afterwards, I got confused with the feelings I was having. And I think now with the benefit of time is what I realised is that I was grieving for a pregnancy and a birth that I was never going to have, because I wasn't. And that would still be the case if I'd had 15 more babies. I still wouldn't have had that pregnancy that I know some people get. I know it does exist. It's not just to me, but yeah, I think I mistook. Maybe I think I did feel angry for a long time, but I think some of it was grief. Yeah, for something that I was never going to get.
Thanks for sharing that. Honestly, I really resonate with you there, and I think a lot of women do as well. I think we're not prepared enough in our culture to deal with the different shades of pregnancy and birth and early matrescence because of the cultural portrayals of it. It was so disempowered. And we also, back in the day, before patriarchy, we would have got good with the fact that not every baby is going to come out alive. Stillbirths would have been a natural part. Women dying in childbirth would have been a natural part of it. I'm not saying that I'm advocating for that or going back to those epochs of time, but I think we're not as prepared for those outcomes now as we have been in the past. So we're not ready for it. And I think as well, the other side of it is like these cultural portrayals of pregnancy and motherhood, and the fact that the harder parts are so silenced, whether it's shame, whether it's like when I was pregnant, I was asking everybody to tell me about their experiences, and women who'd had really hard experiences didn't want to tell me because they didn't want to frighten me. But in hindsight, I wish they had, because I would have been more prepared. So yeah, I think we've got this fake kind of image of what pregnancy and birth looks like, and then we do grieve it. So I think the point is, if we were more prepared to the reality of it and to accept some of the harder parts of it, maybe then it'd be normal that birth is so varied and it's so difficult and it's so challenging, and a lot more women would have less grief because of that. Or not everyone gets this kind of like idealistic, perfect journey through pregnancy and birth. Like, actually, it's really hard. And then I think if that was the case, we perhaps have a lot more mechanisms to help us to get ready for it. And yeah, I think we're just turning it to really look at what's really going on in motherhood now with this fifth wave of feminism, matricentric feminism, and we're only really at the start. So these conversations, I don't know, it's like a little drip, a little drop in sending these ripples out. So we'll see what comes, but I'm with you there. Yeah, I think a lot of women go for a second child if they've got that to heal the first child.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of friends who've had first child, lots of intervention, really unprepared, no idea, grieved the fingers doing these speech marks, natural birth. And then they've had a second child and done it all at home, done it all how they wanted it, and had the doula in. And that really has caused a lot of healing for the first. So I really get what you're saying. I think a lot of women can resonate with that. And yeah, some women as well, I think they want to have a couple of kids. That's the idea. Like, I always thought I would have two. But once I'd had one and then realised how hard it was, like the thing that would stop me having another child now is the sleep deprivation. It's got nothing to do with whether I want another child or not. Nothing to do with whether I think I can cope or not, because I know I can, because I went through it. But the horror of the sleep deprivation, what it did to my psyche, I'd break. If I had to go through that again, I'd break. I'd be institutionalized, I reckon, if I had to go through that again. So I think that's another thing that factors in. And I read a blog actually a couple of days ago about that, where the reality of motherhood now is really setting in. We're understanding how difficult it is. And so families are having less children. There's a lot more one child families now than there ever has been. And I'm hoping that kind of puts the willies up the government, because children feed into the GDP. If we don't have kids, we don't have an economic workforce to support this monetized society and this continue with this mess of consumerism that we've got ourselves in. So if child numbers decline, then what we've got is more responsibility for the government to look after those elderly people that are the parents of those children. If the children have accidents or whatever and they don't make it to look after the parents, then there's going to be a lot more elderly people with less people to look after them, less people for the workforce. So it makes sense to start looking after mums and making it better. We can kind of, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's a lot in it. There's a lot in it. So thanks for raising that. So yeah, anything else you want to say to finish off contextualizing your journey through into matrescence before we get to school?
I don't think so, no. I think that probably covers everything.
Great. So yeah, let's get into it then. So this thing about school. So yeah, the reason I wanted to talk about this on a podcast was because it's clunky. It's really clunky. Like, I personally felt from the get-go that I would homeschool my child. And I wouldn't send him to a school where they've got choice to condition him with norms based on what they believe. I didn't want to let go of any of my values, and I wanted him nurtured as an individual in ways that align with my ethics. Unfortunately, though, as reality of motherhood set in this monetized society, I can't homeschool my child. The government don't make it an option to get paid. So they won't give me the money that they give to the school to teach my own children at home. Not an option. I can only get paid for childcare if I'm sending my child to another organisation and institution, because I'm not valued as an educator for him in his life. So I also put him in other provisions that aren't traditional, Western, set by the government. There's a Montessori, or there's a Steiner home ed hub, or there's another Democratic Learning Association, and these kind of more in line with my ethics, but they're expensive. So it's like the cost of my monthly rent to send my child to one of these environments just for 3 days a week, which would be ideal, but I can't afford that. I'm just about to try and get my career going now. My child's actually in school. So I can't do that. I can't work part-time. I can't work if I've got to care for him. And if I can't work, then I can't afford to pay to send him to these other provisions. So I'm forced into pick a school from what's out there. And I think a lot of parents that are trying to do conscious parenting are feeling this now. So we have to make sacrifices. And that's where you came into my life as well. That woman's got it. She's understanding it. She's doing it. What I'm feeling now, this weight of, I've got to make all these sacrifices. Like, Frankel came home and said, they made me keep the coat on and I was really hot and I felt like I was turning into fire, but they wouldn't let me take my coat off. In that moment, I was like, why not? This protective mama bear was like, why would you make my kid keep his coat on if he's saying he needs to take it off? So I said, you go to school tomorrow and you tell him, if you're out, your mummy says you can do whatever you want. And then he's like, I don't really want to say that to the teachers. And I'm like, oh yeah. So just that one little example, there's so much in it of sacrifice, of having to trust these other adults called teachers with their own biases, with their own stuff, their own mood swings, and how that's going to impact my kid. And yeah, so much. And that's when you said that thing to me that I can't remember the exact words. It's something along the lines of, yeah, there's these moments where it's like a layer just has to fall off, like a little piece of your heart. something like that, you said. So that's when I invited you, isn't it, to come on and have a chat about this. Like, why don't you speak to how it was for you and some of these things that come up, and we'll just keep the dialogue going, see if I want to interject.
Yeah, no, I can definitely. It does feel like that. It does feel like you have to let some stuff go. Like, it does feel like you say, like you sort in the part of your heart is like your right arm being chopped off, isn't it? When they're not around, and you do have to. I think that was one of the biggest things for me is the relinquishing of control. And I think before they start preschool, Steiner, whatever kind of setting they go in, you are in your own little protected bubble, and you can control who you mix with, can't you? The places that you go, the other children that they encounter, the other adults that they encounter, you're in complete control of that. And I think for us, when the first realization and the first step of relinquishing control was preschool, and we both remember the first like parents' evening type thing that they had, and it was that first time of like where she was like seen by somebody that was external to our bubble, that was in more of an educational capacity, and like certain things were highlighted, and it both took us by surprise really, but at the same time as that being like, oh gosh, okay, that we didn't necessarily see that as being as much of an issue as perhaps it was.
Can you say what you mean? What did they highlight?
So she's always been super full of energy, and I've suspected for roughly just before preschool time really that there was potentially some neurodivergence there, particularly ADHD. And she finds listening really tricky, and that was one of the things that they brought up. And whereas obviously we've got no like yardstick, like we've never raised a child before, so we don't know what an average 3-year-old is because we've just got ours. But as difficult as it was to hear that there's bits and pieces there that need a little bit of work on, they were very supportive in the different mechanisms, and they wanted to help us. Fundamentally, they wanted to help us to help her. And I think that was the first time that we were both like, oh, okay. And I guess the preschool experience for us was a real learning curve as well, because like I say, it's that first step to relinquishing control to an extent, because obviously she wasn't in every day. She was only in 2 days a week. And you're drip fed that thing of that you're not in complete control over what they encounter. So even as simple as like certain words and phrases, like we try and follow gentle parenting and responsive and just respond to what's in front of us and not what other people say you should do. If X is happening, you should do that. So they're all completely different. You can't possibly follow such a strict like framework. And there would be like certain phrases and words and even like toys that I would be like, no, I don't want, make a conscious choice. I don't want her to be exposed to that. And then you start to realize that you can't fully control that. And I think that was that first like realization of, yeah, no, actually, I can't control all of this. And I am a little bit of a control freak as well. So that was like a little bit difficult to let go as well. And I think because we've had the start to life that we did, and she is our one and only, and you want everything to be like completely perfect and spot on the first time, and you're so scared of doing something that'll cause an issue, or is this going to cause them some like issue when they're like 25 and it's because my mother let me play with such a toy, and you just like, there's so much like pressure, isn't there, to get it spot on like the first time. And I guess it stirred up some of them feelings of, oh God. But so yeah, I guess that was like the first part of it really, but it also made us see that people do want to help you. It's not just like she does X, Y, Z and you need to sort that. They were very much want to hold your hand and help you. You can do X, Y, Z, and they were great. And she did love it. She loved the whole thing. And we did as well, but yeah, it was definitely like the first rung of realising it.
Yeah, I get what you mean about these phrases. I've tried really hard not to use the word naughty. I'm trying to talk about the behaviour isn't okay, but not that he's naughty. And when he like started school, he used the word naughty to speak about himself for the first time in his life. So I felt it like what you're saying there. And even in the first skill book, the reading book that he brought home, and the comprehension questions at the end. There's no words in it yet for him to read, but there's comprehension questions at the end. And one of the questions talked about this dog being naughty. The dog wasn't naughty. We had to unpack that and speak about that, to have to counter the narratives that he's coming home with. And yeah, so I get that. All I can do is buffer, but I try and think, well, there's so many things in the world that aren't okay. And some people say that's just the way it is. But other people say it shouldn't be like that. And let's imagine how it should be and then try and bring it in. And I think we're that generation of parents that are saying it shouldn't be like that, but we still haven't got the systems in place because they've not evolved yet. Maybe by the time we're grandparents, we might be seeing these changes in the systems that we're interacting with. Yeah. But then you think the other side of it for me is resilience and critical thinking, because these are the skills that you need for his generation, because we're paving the way. We're saying it's not okay and we're trying our best, but they're the ones that are going to actually be making the changes, living the changes from our inspiration. So if I can encourage him to really believe and embody that some things are the way they are, but he's got every right and he should say, that's not okay, and this is how we should do it, and feel like he can challenge that and make a change. So part of it is, ouch, I wish he didn't come home and call himself naughty, but there's an opportunity there for me to help him really embody and live this way of challenging. Okay, that's the thing. It shouldn't be like that. This is how it should be. And how do we work with it? So I'm teaching him. And interestingly, the other day, I think, what's he going to be when he grows up? I don't want him to be a farmer like his dad and his granddad, which they might not be pleased to hear, because it's such a tie. And I'm a bit of a revolutionist and I understand what's going wrong in the world. Like, I want him to be a great man that has a great impact on society. And he's very bossy, frankly. Try and say, don't give too many rules at playtime. Even when I play games with him, it takes 10 minutes for him to go through all the rules before we can start the game. And it's a bit tiring. But he's on the school council as well, and he's come home and he's actually, in his first meeting, got the school to agree to have a fish tank at the front of the school. So he's going for it. And now I'm thinking, wow, am I actually shaping him up to be a politician here? If I encourage this bossiness and this entitledness, but I also dapple him with all these pro-feminist ideas, ecological awareness, like real critical thinking, really give him his autonomy, and they might be shaping a really incredible world of the future. So one day, all the layers of that just came from him calling himself naughty. So yeah, there's so much in it. There is so much. There's so much in it, isn't there? So continue, Lorna. You're still at preschool, aren't you? Sorry, go on.
It's all right. Yeah. Trying to think now where to go. And then, yeah, obviously finished preschool and then school started. And I do think preschool did a lot of groundwork really for like our expectations. And
was she at Midgley, the same school? Was she at preschool at the school where she's at?
No, she was at a different
okay.
one. Yeah, a different one. Yeah, so I do think it did a lot of groundwork in preparing us as well as her, how everything might feel. And then, yeah, so she started reception, and because she was early, she should have actually been in this year's intake, but because she was early, she was obviously in last year's. And so we did enter it with an understandable degree of trepidation of, is she going to be able to cope with it? Because though her birthday fell in for the right timings for last year's reception intake, if she'd have come when she was due, she would have been in this time's reception. So we did debate, should we delay a start, etc. But there was nothing really other than my worry over it really that was like causing us to think anything otherwise really. So she went and started last year, and it did feel like it is just like a little bit of your heart that is just tottering around with them, and you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna have to leave that heart here now. And it's really weird. I feel like it was quite surreal at first, and then you start to think about, as you go through the day, you're like, I wonder what they're doing now, and wonder if they're doing that all right, and I wonder if they understand what she's meaning when she might say or do that, and will they interpret that behaviour as that? And you do worry about all these things, and then, but she's thrived. She did so well in reception. She loved it, and the development, and she was just like a sponge. She'd come home and she'd just regurgitate all this information, and the desire to want to do stuff and read letters and sound out letters when she just started learning phonics. And it was just like, because she left preschool and you just think, Christ, I can't even imagine how they're even going to teach you to know a letter. How does that even work? Because the minute you would try and do anything, we'd do obviously learning through playing, all that sort of stuff. And so you felt like you were making good groundwork. But if I at any point tried to be like, this is a sir, she'd be like, no, I'm off. And like, I see what you're doing, don't try it. And I just thought, God, I just can't even think how they're going to get her to even focus for that length of time. But they have, and they did, and yeah, and she has really thrived, and that's been a gift really, that seeing is completely capable of all this stuff. And I had that same thing that you did of the homeschool thing. And I remember my sister's a primary school teacher. She doesn't live in the UK, and I remember way before we started looking for school, she said, you're not going to find the perfect one. That just simply cannot exist. You have to find the one that's the closest fit for your family and for her. And we were looking around, and it was hands down, it was going to be up there in terms of proximity to the school and the facilities. And for us, the outside space was a massive thing that we needed to know she would have, and how readily available it was as well, because we were always outside, and that's where she is. Obviously, they're not capable of self-regulation, but in those early years, that was where she was most regulated, outside. And so for me and my other half, it was, we need to know that she's got access to outside. She starts to get a little bit overstimulated. She just needs, a little bit of a minute. And it was lovely, because obviously you'll get it as well with the pictures now. You get pictures of what they're up to and little captions of what they've been doing. It's like having a little fly on the wall, seeing what they've been doing. And though you have to relinquish the control, it helps bring some of it back, because you can see what they've been doing, and you can see they've been outside in the pouring rain with all the coats on, splashing about in the puddles and playing with the water, or out in the snow and stuff. And so you know that they are getting all of that, and it does help you feel like your hands aren't tied behind your back quite so much.
Let the listeners know that you're speaking about something called Tapestry.
Yeah.
So this is an app that we have as parents of the children in this school, where the teachers are uploading pictures and information about what's going on. Yeah. I'm not sure about all schools. Don't know if all schools do that. No. I bet they do, though, with the advancing technology and the reporting and stuff like that.
So yeah, and that was really nice. And then I think we both felt like this bit of grief at the idea of that being finished, really, but they've tweaked things and they've got a similar platform for the rest of the school now, which is really nice. It is really nice checking in and seeing what they're doing. But for me, I think everything that I've, on a personal level, experienced has influenced how a parent and how I've navigated through the school process. For me, it's forging a really strong relationship and bond with the school itself and with her teachers, and I have done that, and they're forthcoming with anything, and they are really good at communicating. So again, it feels like she's that bit closer to me, because I've got that bond with them, and it's such a positive bond that I feel like we've got more autonomy. And I know that's can't be the case in all schools, because some schools are so much bigger. And I think that's part of the beauty of where they are, is that you can have a bit more autonomy and more of a say and input, really. And they do really take that on and tailor to stuff as well, which is, it's vital, isn't it, really, when you can see that they might find certain things difficult, knowing that it gets seen and it gets acted upon as well. And I know that they do that because of parents' evening and things. Her teacher said recently, she said, I know when she can get pushed that little bit more and when she can't, and we step back and we just revisit it at another time. And to hear that was like golden for us, because I imagine it's the case in a lot of schools where they might see that behaviour or a little bit of a change in the behaviour that's them saying, I can't, I've had enough right now, I can't do it. But they might not either have the resources or the facilities or the time to cater to that. And then that behaviour obviously then can really escalate quite quickly. Whereas where they are, she's not experiencing that, they can cater to that. And I think that's, for us, that's so important, knowing that she's getting responded to, isn't it? That her little body's saying, no, I can't do it now. And it's being responded to. I guess that's as much as you can ask for, isn't it? As an adult, if you're reaching your end and you can't, if you're forced to keep going, that's going to make it really tough, isn't it? And we're adults with most of the time the ability to think rationally, but it's not the same for little ones, is it? But
No. Yeah, I'm hearing you just to say again to the listeners that our children go to a small village school. Not a lot of kids in there, is there? I think there was 6 in Frankel's class. The reception class is 6. There was 3 the year before from the intake. So they're mixed, don't they, across the first few, the early years mix together. And the school itself, it's got a forest provision, hasn't it? And forestry school provision where they get an afternoon or a morning every other week, each of the classes. So it seems like the best apple out of the bad bunch. That's what I thought. But yeah, I've had some issues, and the celebration assembly on a Friday, like for 3 in a row, there was the topic of war. And what they do is showcase what they've been doing in each class, because you've got all the classes together in that assembly. Like the eldest class had, for literacy, written a poem about war, and they were reading it out in celebration assembly to show the parents who were invited. But then you've got the reception class sat right at the front, then year 1 and year 2, and this poem had a lot of negative language, words that were probably not appropriate for small ears. And then towards the end of the poem, it finished with this line of children dying. And though I felt that I didn't want to hear those words, like I felt it, my body going, oh, it's a bit grim, especially on a Friday morning. And I sit there and I think, oh, they could be doing so many other things, like dancing and asking the children to say, what are you celebrating about yourself this week? And that to me is celebration assembly. And there's only been 2 weeks out of, I think it's 7 weeks now or 8 weeks, where they've give out certificates for stuff other than academic achievement. For the first 5 or 6 weeks, all the certificates that they give to some of the children were for literacy and numeracy. None were for critical thinking, none were for helpful behaviour, none were for self-regulation, none were for artistic endeavours, creativity, musicality, or pro-social behaviour. So I've had a lot of issues with the school, and I think I see myself as the parent that's always having a word. And there were another one where they'd showcase what they'd done in RE. I think this was year 5 or year 4, showcase what they'd done in RE. And again, it was about a king who had a war against these people for 3 years because they refused to believe in the same God. And so for me, I was really concerned about how much of this kind of war mentality was being poured on my child. And I know they've done like different bits and they do different things throughout the day. And he's not himself getting lessons on war. But it really concerned me. It just didn't land right in my body. I think they're so little, and already he talks a lot about killing. I don't know if that's a boy thing or whatever, but even his granddad and his dad, like, they've got books about the war. And once Frankel said to me, oh, we killed the Germans, like, just come out with it. And it's like normalizing that humans killing other humans is a normal part of life. And so I was very concerned, and I had a meeting with the head teacher. And then the week after, there was war again in the assembly. So I don't know, I felt this thing about what you said about relinquishing control, and I struggle with it. I went the other way. And then I woke up one morning, had this little dream about the kids all stood at the front in a line, speaking about animism, which is mine and Frankel's belief system, that everything's alive, everything's got some sort of consciousness. There's helpful resources out there in the world. So, for example, plants. Lavender can help soothe our nervous system if we feel stressed, or it can help us sleep. So plants, in a way, are healers. They've got this awareness where they're wanting to help humans. Chamomile helps. Other things help us with when we've got fever. Like if you make strawberry and nettle lollies, they help with hay fever symptoms. Just helping children to become aware of what's out there that's helpful, that can resource them. Like, why aren't we doing that instead? And so I wrote this email and I was really careful, and I said, I'd really like to come in and maybe do a volunteer session with the kids in RE about animism, because it's full of positive, helpful, empowering themes, whereas other religions aren't. The patriarchal, the dogmatic, they've got a lot of rules, and they breed this kind of sinful mentality instead of, oh, we're humans, we're just learning. Sometimes we make mistakes. It's okay. What's more important is how we deal with it and how we handle ourselves. That's what I want to be teaching my son. And because of quite, I don't know, I'm going to stay stuck in the dark ages, but it does feel a bit like that. So I sent this email and I said, I've already started this really nice PowerPoint. I could bring in some herbs, could even do a little meditation where they meet a power animal, because that's a part of animism as well, like working with archetypes that can really help us. Like lion can help us feel brave, and caterpillar and butterfly teach us so much about transformation. Sometimes we have to go through really hard changes, but it's okay. Something beautiful can come on the other side. And she's not even wrote back. That was like 3 weeks ago. So for me, like, part of me wants to get in there and be in there and control what my son's being shown, and I don't know, help the skill to evolve. But then I think, who am I to say that? Who am I to say that I'm a mother? But then I have got some awareness around these things. I've just finished a master's in transpersonal psychology, where we looked at applied transpersonal psychology, systemic change, changing the way we think about the world so that we can be different in it, so that we stop a lot of these looming terrors of omnicide, ecocide, severe mental health problems. Like all the weight of what we're carrying now is in our generation and aware of. We're having to teach our kids how to navigate that, because they're going to become adults, and it's either going to be worse or better when they're our age. And like, how do we make that change? We change these systems that are feeding in these conditionings and these mentalities. It's what are we normalizing? Are we normalizing radical approaches to energy, radical approaches to self, to love, to positivity, to harmony, to community? Or are we radicalizing old ways of being that didn't serve us, that just continue in the same thread? And yeah, there's stuff around that I'm really struggling with. And I don't want to take him out of there because he's putting his roots down. I don't want to disrupt him. But if it's for the benefit of him, then I don't know. So I find it really hard to relinquish control.
Yeah, I think I can totally get why you would feel uncomfortable, definitely, certainly with the war and the killing and everything else, because it isn't, as an adult, it's jarring and it's uncomfortable to hear, isn't it? And then you've got these little minds that, yeah, they don't have that capacity to understand how all of that comes about. Not that it should do in the first place, but and they're so literal, aren't they, with their thinking and what they're saying. And yeah, to be honest, I hadn't thought about it in that way, to be fair, but I don't go to the assemblies because I'm at work, so I can't go. So I don't know what they're saying. My other half goes, but obviously I'm asking very specific questions over what my little girl's done and what she said and did she seem okay and that sort of stuff. So I guess my focus is on other stuff, not necessarily what else has been said. To touch on the certificate side of things, she's definitely received ones for academic things, achievements, but also one that she got, which was my proudest one, she got one for being kind. And I just thought, my heart just like beamed when I saw that. I just thought, what a wonderful thing to get recognised. And because she is kind, she's a lovely little being. And for it to get recognised and to be awarded, I just thought, what a lovely thing. What a nice thing to have been received, really. initially I did feel the awards a little bit uncomfortable because you've got that thing of they should just be intrinsically motivated. But I guess I came to the conclusion of, is that realistic? And they do get such a buzz off getting these awards, and even if you're at home, and to give them something if they've done a really great job on something, sometimes you do just want to give them a little bit of a treat, don't you? To be like, you've done such a great job, I really think that you deserve that little biscuit, whatever. It can be whatever, can't it? And I guess actually, who am I to say they should just be intrinsically motivated when you do it at home? Not that I don't make a habit of it, but I guess you just do it sometimes. I suppose as an adult, if you've done something really good, you're like, I'm going to buy myself a chocolate bar because I've done really well today. I guess it's the same thing, isn't it? I suppose. And you can't. It's another thing, isn't it, of holding unrealistic expectations of a child. You think, how would an adult respond, and what would an adult want to get out of that? Can't expect a child to be any different or to be more developed, emotionally developed over an adult. It's just not going to happen, is it? But yeah, to go back on to the subject of the assemblies, that's not something I'd really thought of. But I do think the herbs and the going into RE and things, I think that would be really interesting. I think they would really like to hear about stuff like that. My mum is she knows so much stuff about the healing power of plants and herbs and everything else. She's just this font of knowledge, and I'm like, oh, can't imagine being able to hold all the information in my head. And she did me the most beautiful book. She'd drawn all the flowers and plants and things that you can do with them and what properties they have and what you can use for that and this and that. And she's really into foraging and things. And it is fascinating. It is really fascinating. And she spends time with friends. She knows stuff from that as well. And I think they'd really enjoy that. I think that would be really cool. And maybe as an adult, we might have remembered it now, whereas I find it impossible to remember stuff. Whereas if we'd been taught that when I was little, I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah, I think for me, what I get to is the inorganic nature of modernity. And Jung talks about this. There's a lot of really brilliant minds that understand the impact of leaving nature to become this modern society that exists as something separate and uses nature as a resource, and then doesn't really understand how we interact with nature to get those resources. So children now, they're not involved in the organic process of the cycles of time and seasons and planting and growing and investing and then harvesting. So there's no real appreciation of what it means when your food lands on your table, and that we're so separate from nature, and that's causing a lot of impact on our mental health and well-being. Like what you said before, Fern's most regulated when she's in nature. I feel like that about myself. So there's a lot of research now around what happens when you walk in the forest, what happens when you put your bare feet on the earth, and how restorative it is. But you've got people on the earth still living in tribal cultures where they're hunter-gatherers, and the difference for motherhood and early infancy is absolutely so vast. Because of modernity, there's a lot more bottle feeding than there ever has been in our history as humanity. When you look at hunter-gatherers, there's no bottle feeding at all. The children are with the mothers, or they're with the other kids being held and played with, and that mother's held by her mother as she learns. And just, I don't know, something so inorganic about the framework that we're living in the West that's causing so many problems. And school has been an invention, and it's not that old. It's quite new in our humanity. And I think there are a lot of implications that we don't really understand because we just take it as a norm, take it as a given. But for me, we've got an opportunity now with this awareness. Like, school is this incredible space with all this potential where we can change these paradigms, where we can condition the next generation of adults to live differently. So I think we could just change everything in one generation if we just use these resources that we've got. If we took care of mums and small infants better and gave them more resources, and then we also use school as this opportunity to recondition the future leaders of society, that everything just be able to work itself out. But you have to have people on board, don't you? You have to have the schools on board. And again, there's so much pressure. They're under so much pressure with the curriculum, what's being fed to them, what they have to teach. And then some of it just isn't guided. Like, personal and health education has now become personal and social, personal, what is it? Let me say that again. So PSHE, personal, social and health education, has now become PSED, personal, social and emotional development. So in this academic year, what's dropped into the curriculum is self-regulation. So primary school teachers have around 13 subjects that they have to get to know, get to grips with, and then teach. And this is another thing that they have to learn, get to know, and teach. Now, my mum was a primary school teacher. Her self-regulation consisted of a glass of Chardonnay in the evening and trying to get to bed before 3 a.m. to have at least 4 hours before she got up again to go back to work the next day. She would take marking on holiday with her. There was no self-regulation. So she wasn't embodying it. She had no idea how she's supposed to teach that to the next generation. She has to learn it. She has to take these non-statutory guidance from all kinds of companies and make some sort of lesson plan to deliver something that's actually a fundamental need, especially now with the state of the 21st century. And it's just crazy. It's crazy. So there's a small kind of like fragment or one little tiny little blade of grass in a field, I think, of shifting the mentality around it. But it's not enough. It's just not enough. And I know I'm just going off on all kinds of tangents here, but I feel so passionately about this. I know that there's a different way we could be doing it. And if we could just take a minute from this constant treadmill of academia, success, we've got to hit these league tables, we've got to do this, and we've got to, the bureaucracy of it, we've got to evidence it all. So it's so overwhelmed. We could just take a minute, just sit down all together and go, what do we want to really do in this school? What do we want to really do with our children? What do we want them to be learning? You said before how you felt that you got a certificate for being kind. That moves us in our hearts because we want, naturally, human beings want to be in harmony with each other, want to help each other because we're tribal beings, we're mammals that live in tribes and herds. So it's fundamental. If we can all be kind to each other, then it's going to be successful for our herd. And when we're in school and we're hearing these poems about wars, it's jarring because it's against the nature of our humanity. We don't want that to happen. We don't want to hear about it. It's horrible. Like, how many people have died unnecessarily because of these warmongers? And it's really about their wealth. It's got nothing to do with peacekeeping. It's got nothing to do with land or resources. Really, war is about power hungry people that have got a lot of trauma, having a lot of access to war machines and power and using it for their own gain. It's like when you put two really young boy toddlers in a room and just give them one tractor. There's going to be a war over that tractor because they haven't learned yet. Oh no, we can share, we can take turns. We're really trying to teach that to our children, don't we? About sharing, that's a big thing. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm saying. But yeah, there's so much we could do to pioneer a new way. We could start now. Just have a couple of weeks off the academic curriculum, be in school together, like that celebration assembly, the parents and kids, let's all have a little dance, shake off all the stuff, all the heavy energy, let's take some deep breaths, and we could use it as an opportunity to do some actual physical, experiential self-regulation, mindfulness, all together as a collective, and then say, what are you celebrating about your week? What are you celebrating about the world? And for me, that's a celebration assembly. No, let's just give 10% of the children certificates for doing things. And then the other kids have to feel like they haven't done well that week. Because for you, your thing about the certificates was you think they should be motivated. My thing about it is kids who aren't getting them feeling shit about themselves. Frankel didn't get one the whole first term. He only got his last week. But Meredith, who's another child in his class, she got a certificate in the first term and she got top table. Now I wait and I watch Frankel every week and he claps when the other kids get a certificate. So I don't see him looking despondent or let down or like feeling bad about himself. But this week he got a certificate, but Meredith got top table and it was a thing. So he couldn't just sit in the celebration of himself doing well with his phonics and helping Eli. He's also got this shadow that somebody else did better than him. So it has impacted his self-esteem. And I think, is it worth it? Was it worth it? Do they need to get certificates? Could they be celebrating all of the children in different ways? Because then as you're growing up with those paradigms, it's where you put yourself, isn't it, in the hierarchy of the society of school. If you're someone who's a high achiever, then you're top, you're popular, you can be looked at as a certain way. But if you're not, and especially if you've got these behaviours and you have with your child with this diagnosis, they're not calling her naughty. They're not saying she's being silly. They're saying she's dysregulated. And then they're applying this remedy of she needs a bit of space. But Frankel is being called silly. He's coming on calling himself naughty. If I had an ADHD diagnosis, that would be completely different. But is he just being a kid? And if he is, then should he be feeling silly or naughty? Or should he just be feeling like a kid and he's just expressing himself and is boisterous and that's okay? So these labels are already starting, aren't they? Already in his psyche. He's already feeling a bit of this and a bit of that. And he's ended up really dysregulated as well because he splits his time between his two parents. So he goes to his dad's on a Wednesday night, they drop him off at school on a Thursday, and then every other weekend he goes to his dad's. So he's got different parents in there, different care for his emotional needs, completely different. Bribes, he gets threatened with a stick. I think his granddad's only joking, but it's literal to him. So he's said to me when he's been dysregulated, I'll hit you. If you go to the shop now, I'll hit you. So he's coming, and then I have to work to decondition all of that. And said, well, that's not how we treat each other. So he's going backwards and forwards with this seesaw. And so for us, when he went from 2 days at kinder to 5 days a week at school, he was massively dysregulated. Now, school didn't see any of that because at school he's just being boisterous, Frankel, having some fun. His dad and granddad don't see any of it because there he knows if he's emotional, he won't get any sweets if he doesn't stop crying, or Father Christmas won't come if he doesn't stop crying. So he doesn't emote at his father's house. So he seems a completely different child in these two environments. But when it comes to me, straight away, every Thursday without fail, like clockwork, massive tantrum, tiniest little thing, massive tantrum. So it's all coming out to me. And I'm a single mum. Nobody else sees it. So I've gone into school and said, I'm not keeping him in 5 days. I'm taking him off on Monday because he's dysregulated. And it wasn't just Thursday and Saturday. Like after the first 5 weeks of being in school, the first term, it was every half an hour in the evenings and at the weekend. And it were just tiniest little thing did just kick off and kick off. And it was so hard, not just for him and his nervous system, but for me to deal with that as well, because I was a single mum. I've got this to do, I've got that to do. I can't just sit and hold him in his emotions all the time. 'Cause if it gets to 6 o'clock, he's only going to get tea at 7 o'clock, which is too late. Then bedtime, the whole fabric of things changes. So I've made this decision. And because his father's the way he is, like he cut my child maintenance in half because he felt disempowered because we're in this patriarchal culture. And so that's been another fight that I've had to contend with. And I think I have this idea that school see me as the maverick parent, the problematic parent, the one who's coming in to say, oh, this isn't right, and this isn't right, and this isn't right. But really, pioneering parent, really, because of the paradigm I'm stuck in, because I'm not the norm. Like the black sheep thing is on me. And yeah, I found that quite difficult to reconcile, actually. I try my best with the head teacher and have conversations. The most recent one, I feel like I'm just like going on a bit of a, see my model, skibble. The other thing was about the nasal flu spray. I haven't vaccinated my child because of how I believe about things. I didn't even have the whooping cough because when I did the research, it's a fake whooping cough. And in baboons, it didn't stop them spreading it. It made them worse at spreading it. If you left baboons to contract whooping cough and move through it and heal it like they could, then they didn't get it again and they didn't spread it either. There's something about herd immunity that's been lost with immunizations, but that's each parent's on their own journey with that. And it's up to their individual, right? But I haven't. So when it came to this nasal flu spray, the letter didn't even ask if I consent. It was so assumptive in its languaging. And then, so I felt like I had to send some evidence in alongside for me to say my child won't be in school that day. Not only does he not want the vaccine, he doesn't want to be in the school where it's a live vaccine is being spread around. They will get ill from the flu vaccine. And then it's more time for the parents to be at home nursing. Maybe the parents can't go to work on Monday because the kid's still ill on the Monday. And I read this article with The Guardian, and there were 78 studies done, and none of them gave enough evidence to say that it was worth the risk for the kids. So I sent that evidence in, and also said it would have been nice to even been asked if I consent to that, because it's so assumptive. Not even a permission slip. And then the response was, yeah, thanks, I'll tell the head teacher. Not, oh, thanks for sharing this with us. We didn't know that. Let's have a bit of an investigation. Do we really want our schools to be doing that to our kids? Have we really thought about it? There's so much norms, societal norms, conditioned norms that just get placed on us. And now I feel like I stick out like a sore thumb for saying, no, I don't want that. That's not okay. I'm not going to be involved in that. Don't want war. Don't want religion. Let's have a new way. But I'm not a weirdo. I'm someone that's speaking sense. I'm someone that's quite wise and quite learned, actually. And so I find it, personally, my personal integration is like challenging to reconcile the fight that I have to have with the school and not wanting to relinquish control. No, I don't want to relinquish control. Don't want people to be calling himself naughty or saying it is silly and feeling bad about himself. No, that's the paradigm. It's not the truth. But it is taken as a truth in these school institutions, and I don't think they're as aware as they should be of the impact of that. What a woman revolution! So maybe I should get a petition signed by the parents to at least deliver my little animism thing, and then that can be showcased in Celebration Assembly. There you go. What comes up for you, Lorna?
So now I'm just thinking about everything that you've said, really. I guess I had thought of something when you were talking, and now it's just in my typical brain. I've got focused on what you were saying, and I've forgotten what it was now. Something that I did think of was when you were saying about like league tables, etc. I do wonder if, I guess it then feeds into like society as a whole, doesn't it? Then of what maybe the majority of society look for. They look for, what does it say on what does the Ofsted inspection say? What percentage achieved this in that particular area, etc. And I suppose the vast majority of people do look for things like that as a measure of whether it's a good school or not. Whereas people like you and I and other people that I know, they look for other things. They're not necessarily as hung up on what numbers are there. It's, well, what do they do for that? And what have they got for that facility? And, you know, what kind of subjects do they do? And all that sort of thing. And for us, that was more important. Like for us, when Fern leaves school, as long as she's happy and resilient, and we're not, obviously, we want her to feel proud of her achievements, but if she's not a top A-star scoring student, even looking into the high school now, even if she comes out with not sparkling A-stars or whatever the equivalent of an A-star is these days, I don't actually know, we're not really that bothered, because we don't hold those things as being pivotal to the measure of success. It's whether she's well-adjusted and is kind and a nice person and is happy and feels proud of what she has achieved, what she can achieve versus what her peer might be able to achieve will look vastly different. And there's nothing wrong with that, because as soon as you leave school, nobody gives a monkeys what you've got. I went to uni. I didn't use my degree in my career. I haven't used it one bit. People do get very hung up on achievements, and that's not the measure of a person, is it? You could know somebody that's the most intelligent person in the world, but if they're not a kind person, then you're not going to want to know them, are you? Like, it's not what's important, but I think something that both me and Half have realised is that when you go into school, or society in general, when you're out that little sort of early years bubble, you start to realise that people don't actually parent in the same way as you. You surround yourself with like-minded people, don't you? And then you're into these different areas and you're like, oh, actually, people are all like me. And of course, why would they be? Because, you know, that's just not life, is it? But you are acutely aware of the differences in parentings and the difference in values and what people hold important to them. Whereas what we hold important to us will be different to the next person. And I think probably a lot of people don't necessarily think of the stuff that me and my other half hold as important. And so we look for stuff that some people might not have even clocked as being a thing. Whereas for us, that could be like a deal breaker. And I'd love it. Like if you went and did what you were talking about, I'd love that. To know that Fern is exposed to just all the different stuff. There's just different stuff out there. There's a lot of like world and life to see, isn't there? And different belief systems. It's not just what's written on the page. There's so much more to that. And that's all part of the, sound cheesy, but like the rich tapestry of life, isn't it? That's all what makes it interesting, isn't it? And having all this stuff and knowing interesting things. And I love like when my mum starts telling me about things that she probably has told me before, but because I've got such a terrible memory, it's just like totally forgotten it. But I love like hearing about all these different sort of things that her granny told her that she's retained, and I just think it would be wonderful for them to be exposed to that variety, really, and to see the richness of things. And like you say, I think people are really disconnected with nature, and I think it's so sad because it's out there on our doorstep, and it's got this abundance of life in it, hasn't it? And it's so important. And I think people just get completely hung up on life and the chaos that life brings, and they just forget what's in front of their noses, really. And I think what I love about having a child is that they do force you to slow down, don't they? To an infuriating level sometimes, and you're just like, can we just get to the car, or can we please just get more than one footstep in an hour? But at the same time, like, it is a wonderful thing because it does stop you. It does force you to stop and, look around and really think about stuff. And they'll pick up a rock and they'll be like, oh, look at this. It looks like a blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, that totally does look like that. And then it's wonderful because it does make you look at stuff in a totally different light. And I think society has really lost that. And I think it's so sad. And I think if you do mention stuff like that, like some people are a bit like, okay, but it's true. You just lost sight of things and want to show how much they've achieved by having a big car or having a big house and stuff like that. And it's sad, isn't it? Because you just lost. I feel like people have just lost what is actually important. And I think another big gift from everything that we've experienced is that it has made us acutely aware of when she was at such a young age of the most important thing is time. And that's like a non-negotiable for us, is having that time with her. And I think that's another thing that people have totally people get so caught up in earning, and you can go and earn more money, but you can never go back and get that time, can you? So that's been that was another big gift, really. But I've just completely gone off on a massive tangent then. What?
Yeah, I love that time. Thank you for that. There is a lot of pressure on. I'm 41 now and I'm feeling the weight of the future. Like I've got a whole load of experiences. I've been traveling and spent 6 months teaching English in a foreign school in Ecuador, and I've had such a rich variety of experiences, but I haven't got a mortgage. I haven't got any money in the bank, no financial security. And I think when his dad cut the money in half, it made me feel very insecure and almost judgmental of myself because of that. But what you've just reminded me, like, when I'm on my deathbed, I won't look back at late 30s, early 40s and think, I wish I had a job and I'll put money in the bank. I'll think, yeah, things were a bit tight, but I spent lots of time with Frankel and I got to know him, and I was there to help buffer the impact of Western modernity. And yeah, I had to put him in that school, but his auntie's there, his cousins are there, he's round the corner from his dad's, and while that's not my world, it's a part of his world. and he's getting real roots and he's getting belonging. And I can counter the narratives, and I think I will put a bit more, or I'll ask again to go in and do even like a well-being after school class. I can teach a bit of mindfulness and yoga and stuff like that, and try and have some sort of influence. And then also what I've got from you is trying to relinquish control a little bit more, letting go of the fights, because often it's a fight that I'm fighting inside myself. I'm not winning it out there. It's a fight that I'm fighting within myself. So I'm just thinking now about broadening this out for our listeners who aren't in our situation, who don't live in the countryside, whose kids aren't in a village school, who perhaps aren't as well off as we are. What do you think we could say to them to help them to get some medicine from this?
God, that's a big question. I guess from like a school perspective, if they felt that that was something that they were really struggling with, then to ask to meet them and just to keep hammering home your point really, or your concerns. And I think they need to know that you get the struggles as well, go on a level. Because like having seen, and obviously with your mum being a primary school teacher, and obviously with my sister being a primary school teacher, you see what goes on behind closed doors and you see the struggle that they have. And I guess as much as it's important for us as parents to feel seen and heard, they're still individuals as well, aren't they? And they might not necessarily feel completely in alignment with what they're having to teach or the time that they might have allocated for certain things. And I guess making sure that they also feel that's recognised, because they might feel quite pulled, but there is only so much equally that they can do. And I guess my sort of approach to things is like complete transparency and leveling with people. I feel that you get a lot back if you level and you get where you're coming from, because I think a lot of people will just be worried. If there's an issue, they'll be worried about their most prized possession, which is their child or children. And people are rubbish at communicating how they feel, I think, sometimes. And it's coming from a place of vulnerability, isn't it? Generally, because they've got your children in their care, and I guess leveling with them and being honest. And I would like to think that they would get more back by being, rather than going in all guns blazing and not necessarily thinking of the wider picture. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. I'm not sure.
It's helpful for me, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, like you're saying, give yourself permission. If you're a parent and you're concerned about your child or school or something's not sitting right with you, give yourself permission to go in, and with grace and humility that appreciates that's just another person with a very stressful job. Express your concerns and then see if you can move forward as a team, because schools don't want parents or kids to suffer, do they? They don't want that. They want to do what's best. And maybe if you've got these ideas, you think something's better than what they're doing, yeah, go in, make your tack to be humble but strong, and yeah, honouring what they're going through and the limits, what they've got at school, knowing that things take time. They might not be able to click the fingers and be perfect for your kid. And then I think, yeah, for me, that's helpful because I have ADHD and RSD and also come across as very intense. My assertivity to some people comes across as aggression. And I don't mean that. It's just a part of the neurodiversity, my passion. And I can be very direct. I appreciate this insight. I'm going to try again with the animism thing and be a bit more gentle. But in that email, I did express that I know it's so hard for teachers and that it might be really helpful for them for this self-regulation curriculum stuff that's come in now. Yeah, and then the other thing I want to offer for the listeners is around, I'm glad I forgot it now. What was it? Okay, yeah. So the other thing I've got to offer for the listeners is how resilient our children are already. Like, we shouldn't forget that. In this age where perhaps we have got these more conscious beliefs and different values and we're feeling very compromised, Like, it's okay. It's okay to not be able to provide your child with the perfection of the thing you feel intuitively inside your heart. It's okay. We're living in a time where there's great awakening and the systems aren't catching up. So we're having to make these compromises, and our kids are going to be all right. Our kids are all right. Even though Frankel's called himself naughty, he's doing really well with his reading, and he really does love going and playing at school. Like we mentioned a little bit before, this kind of resilience training is good for when we're grown-ups, because we've still not got a perfect paradigm for him to leave school and emerge out into, have we? So the fact that they're practicing resilience and that we're giving them that feedback that, okay, school is one way of doing things. The teacher might be saying one way, but it's not necessarily the whole complete truth. If we're helping them to have that critical mind and be discerning, then we're helping them to cultivate awareness in that environment, which is countering these narratives that we might not agree with. And then obviously sometimes there'll be stuff that's really great at school that we can really celebrate as well and enjoy with them as parents, because we're on this journey as well. So yeah, enjoy it where you can. Take what you want, the good stuff, take what you want and really celebrate it. And then work on just buffering, giving yourself permission as a parent to buffer the stuff or counter the stuff that doesn't sit right with you. And then don't give yourself an hard time that your kids aren't in this perfect educational environment. If you aren't resourced, if you haven't got that opportunity, if you're not that privileged, then we have to make these compromises, and that's okay. We don't have to feel bad about it. We're still doing a really good job. Yeah? What about that? Yeah, I feel like this has been a really beautiful kind of layering of all these tangents. But it's a new conversation, I think, Lorna, what we're having. I think it's a relatively new conversation, so it'll find its feet. And I hope that for the listeners, even us discuss our own acute situation, you could still relate to it in some way. Because I know a lot of you listeners out there aren't in this situation that me and Lorna are in. You haven't got a small school, you've probably got a really big school, you might be in a city, not be able to get out into nature. So we're not wanting anybody to feel bad. You know, we've got these opportunities and we're really grateful for that. We're all living our own individual lives in situations where we've been dealt these cards. And so it's about finding what works for you, giving yourself permission to be more empowered in the way you're moving forward with the things that don't feel right, and intervening and accepting your compromises. Just really hoping that you've been able to relate in some way and that it's been medicine for you. And if you want to get in touch, you're very welcome. If there's any themes as well out there that you feel you want to speak to, or if you want to come on, this pod is for you. It's for you mothers, and it's by you mothers. And without you coming on and being authentic, then we're not changing these narratives. So really welcoming you, come and step forward. And it's all right, isn't it, Lorna?
Yes, it has. Yeah, I was very nervous, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Lorna. I really appreciate it. And yeah, just blessing the past for you, blessing these parts, these spirals of healing that come up when you revisit how it felt when you got the diagnosis, and that revisit how it felt when you're in the hospital and couldn't really be with your child. You know, these spirals that come in the anniversary times or in times when we get space like this, just really honouring that debris of the trauma that's still in you, and just, yeah, celebrating you as a mama and what you've managed to achieve and your strength and your endurance, and just giving thanks for your story and how it's inspired me and humbled me. And yeah, the next time I reach peak stress, overload, or I can't be arsed, I'll think, you imagine how you'd feel if you had cancer and you had to face these big things. Now, come on, and let that be motivation for me to get out of my own way and carry on. Because that's what we're doing it as mums. We'll just get on with, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and crack on. So that's what we do.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much, Lorna. Thank you so much, listeners. If you like this podcast and you want to help me, then I have a donation page which is linked underneath. That'd be really gratefully received. And go well. Blessing you, all doing a great job. So I've been Rainbow, this has been Lorna, we've been Rawful But True. Could you?